The world doesn't reveal who matters until someone chooses to care. The laughter came first, sharp and careless, echoing under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's yearly rent. Phones were already raised, capturing the moment like it was entertainment. On the polished marble floor, an elderly woman lay awkwardly, her coat twisted, her silver hair slightly undone, one hand gripping the air as if searching for something steady. No one moved, not the businessmen in tailored suits, not the couple sipping $200 wine, not even the staff rushing past with perfectly balanced trays. Except one. Emily Carter stopped mid-step, a tray still warm in her hands, her eyes fixed not on the crowd, but on the woman everyone else had already decided didn't matter. For a second, she hesitated. Table 12 was waiting. A $500 bill. A manager who counted seconds like money. The laughter grew louder. Someone muttered, "Not her problem." Emily exhaled slowly, then turned away from the table that could pay her rent and walked straight toward the floor. Kneeling down, she set the tray aside, ignoring the ripple of whispers. "Ma'am," she said softly, her voice steady, calm, different from the noise around them. "Are you hurt?" The woman blinked, surprised, as if kindness was something she hadn't expected to find there. Emily gently adjusted her coat before even touching her, brushing off dust that no one else thought worth noticing. Her movements were careful, respectful, like the woman was something fragile but important. "I'm okay," the woman whispered, though her hand trembled slightly in Emily's grasp. "Let's take it slow," Emily replied, offering her arm, not rushing, not performing, just present. Behind them, a scoff. "She's really doing this?" Another voice laughed. "Hope that tip's worth it." The manager's sharp tone cut through the air. "Emily, get back to your section. Now." But Emily didn't look up. She didn't argue. She didn't rush. She simply stayed, steady as the woman found her balance, their hands still connected in a quiet moment that no camera could fully understand. And then the woman squeezed her hand. Lightly, gratefully. "You're the only one who stopped," she said, her voice almost lost in the room, but somehow louder than everything else. Emily gave a small smile. Not proud, not dramatic, just real. Across the room, the grand entrance doors opened with a soft, heavy sound. No one noticed at first. Not the laughter, not the cameras, not even Emily. But someone had stepped inside, and he had already seen everything. He did not speak at first. He just stood there, near the entrance, his presence quiet but heavy, like a shift in the air no one could explain. His suit was simple, dark, perfectly tailored, the kind that did not need a logo to prove its worth. His eyes moved once across the room, not to the chandeliers, not to the tables, but to the floor. To her, to the woman still holding Emily's hand. And then everything slowed. Emily helped Margaret Hayes to her feet, steady, patient, as if the rest of the world had disappeared. "Take your time," she said gently, adjusting the woman's sleeve again, brushing away what little dust remained. Margaret looked at her, really looked this time, her eyes soft but searching, as if she was trying to understand something rare. "What is your name?" she asked quietly. "Emily," she replied, offering a small, calm smile. Behind them, the manager stepped closer, voice tight, controlled. "Emily, this is your last warning. You are neglecting your tables." Emily nodded once, not in defiance, but in acknowledgement. Still, she did not move away. She simply made sure Margaret was standing firmly before letting go. That was when the man finally took a step forward. Slow, deliberate. The sound of his shoes against marble was enough to draw attention, one head at a time, until the laughter faded without anyone realizing why. Cameras lowered slightly. Conversations paused mid-sentence. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed entirely on Margaret. "Mom." The word was quiet, but it landed like something much louder. Emily blinked, her hand still half raised from helping, her mind catching up to what she had just heard. The room shifted, not physically, but something inside it changed. Margaret turned, her expression softening in a way that felt deeply familiar. "Richard," she said, almost like she had been expecting him all along. A whisper moved through the crowd, spreading faster than the earlier laughter ever had. Richard Hayes. The name did not need to be announced. It carried itself. The man who owned half the skyline. The man whose presence could close deals worth millions before dessert was served. And now, he was standing there, looking not at the crowd, not at the staff, but at the one person who had been on the floor moments ago. His mother. His eyes shifted then, slowly, toward Emily. Not rushed, not judging, studying, as if trying to understand something he had not seen in a very long time. Emily straightened slightly, suddenly aware of the room again, of the silence, of every pair of eyes now watching her instead of the woman she had helped. She did not speak. She did not explain. She simply stood there, hands still, expression calm, like she had done nothing unusual. Richard's gaze did not leave her, and for the first time since he walked in, something in his expression changed. Not surprise, not confusion, something quieter, something closer to respect. And in a room where everything had a price, that silence felt more valuable than anything else. No one laughed now. The room held its breath, as if even the air understood something had shifted beyond repair. Emily lowered her hands slowly, stepping back just enough to give space but not distance. She did not rush away. She did not apologize. She simply remained present, as she had from the beginning. Richard Hayes moved closer to his mother, his posture softening in a way that did not match the reputation that followed his name. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of authority, carrying only concern. Margaret gave a small nod, her fingers still lightly brushing against the place where Emily's hand had been. "I am now," she replied, her eyes drifting back to Emily for a brief second, something unspoken passing between them. Richard noticed. Of course he did. Men like him noticed everything. But this was different. This was not strategy. This was not negotiation. This was something he could not measure. He turned fully toward Emily, studying her again, not her uniform, not the tray she had left behind, but the way she stood. Calm, unshaken, unimpressed. "You helped her," he said, not as a question, but as a statement he needed to hear out loud. Emily nodded once. She needed help. That was all. No explanation, no performance, just truth, simple and complete. A murmur moved through the crowd, softer now, uncertain. The same people who had laughed moments ago shifted in place, their expressions changing, their confidence fading under the weight of what they were beginning to understand. The manager stepped forward again, but this time his voice was different, careful, measured. "Mr. Hayes, I apologize for the situation. We will handle this immediately." Richard did not look at him. Not yet. His attention remained on Emily. "What is your position here?" he asked. "I am a server," she replied. "No hositación." No attempt to elevate it. He nodded slowly, as if filing that away. But something in his eyes suggested the word did not quite fit what he had just witnessed. "And you chose to leave your tables," he continued. "Yes," she said. The manager inhaled sharply beside them, ready to intervene, but Richard raised his hand slightly without turning. A small gesture. Enough. Silence followed. "Why?" he asked. It was not a test. It sounded more like curiosity. Real curiosity. Emily glanced briefly at Margaret, then back at him. "Because she was on the floor," she said. Again, nothing more. No speech. No justification. Just a fact that, somehow, felt heavier than anything else said that night. Richard exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping for a moment before returning to her. Around them, phones lowered completely now. No one was recording anymore. No one wanted to. The moment had changed. It was no longer something to capture. It was something to witness. Margaret reached out gently, touching Richard's arm. "She did more than help me stand," she said softly. "She made me feel seen." The words settled into the room, deeper than any apology, stronger than any authority. Richard looked at his mother, then back at Emily. And for the first time, there was no distance left in his expression. Only recognition, not of who she was, but of what she had done, and what it meant. Silence did not break. It deepened. The kind of silence that made people aware of themselves, of what they had just done or failed to do. Emily shifted slightly, her attention returning to Margaret, not the man beside her, not the room behind her. "Would you like to sit down?" she asked gently, gesturing toward a nearby chair. Margaret nodded, her hand resting lightly on Emily's arm as they moved together, slow and steady, as if the moment deserved time. No one rushed them now, not even the staff. Richard watched every step, his expression unreadable, but his focus unwavering. When Margaret was seated, Emily adjusted the chair just enough, then reached for a clean napkin, placing it neatly in her lap with quiet care. Small details. Invisible, usually. "Not tonight." "Thank you," Margaret said softly. Emily gave a small nod. "Of course." She turned, finally, as if to return to her duties, to step back into the role everyone understood. But Richard spoke again. "Wait. Just one word." "Calm." "Certain." Emily paused, not out of obligation, but acknowledgement. She faced him again, her posture unchanged. Not defensive, not eager, simply present. "You did not hesitate," he said, his voice lower now, almost reflective. "Most people did." Emily's eyes moved briefly across the room, then back to him. "Most people were busy," she replied. There was no accusation in her tone, just observation. That made it land heavier. A few guests looked down at their tables. Others adjusted their jackets, suddenly interested in anything but this moment. Richard noticed that too. Of course he did. He stepped closer, just enough to narrow the distance, but not enough to intrude. "Busy," he repeated quietly, as if testing the word. Then he glanced around the room, taking in the lowered eyes, the stillness, the absence of laughter that had filled the space only minutes before. "Is that what you think?" he asked. Emily met his gaze. "I think people do what they choose to do," she said. Again, simple. Again, undeniable. Margaret smiled faintly from her seat, her eyes warm with something like pride, though they had only just met. The manager cleared his throat, stepping forward carefully. "Mr. Hayes, we would like to offer your mother a private room. Complimentary, of course, and ensure she is comfortable." His words were polished, practiced, but they arrived too late. Richard did not look at him. Not immediately. He was still watching Emily, as if the answer to something important was standing right in front of him. "And her?" he asked, nodding slightly toward Emily. The manager hesitated. "She will return to her duties." The pause said more than the words. Richard's gaze finally shifted. Slow, direct. "No," he said. Not loud, not harsh, just final. The words settled into the room with more authority than any raised voice could carry. The manager stopped speaking. The staff stood still. Even the air seemed to hold its place. Richard looked back at Emily. "You're not going back to anything," he said. There was no command in his tone. No entitlement. Just certainty, shaped by something deeper than power. Emily blinked once, not confused, but thoughtful, as if weighing something only she could see. Around them, people waited. Not for an order, for a meaning. And for the first time that night, the question was not about who she had helped, but what would happen next. Emily did not answer right away. Not because she was unsure, but because she did not rush decisions that mattered. Her eyes moved briefly to Margaret, who was watching her with quiet patience, then back to Richard. "I still have tables," Emily said calmly. It was not resistance. It was responsibility. A few guests shifted again, the reminder landing differently now. Minutes ago, those tables had been more important than anything else in the room. Now they felt distant, irrelevant. Richard studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod, almost as if he respected the answer more than any agreement. "Of course you do," he said. His tone softened, not diminished, just adjusted. "Finish what you started." It was not a dismissal. It was acknowledgement. Emily inclined her head slightly, then turned, picking up the tray she had set aside earlier. The motion was smooth, practiced, unchanged, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, and yet everything had. She walked back toward her section, past the same guests who had laughed before. But no one laughed now. No one spoke. Some avoided her gaze. Others watched her carefully, as if trying to understand something they had missed the first time. At table 12, the couple who had been waiting sat quietly, their menus untouched. The man cleared his throat. We "We're not in a rush," he said, his voice lower than before. Emily gave a polite nod. "Thank you for your patience. No edge, no judgment, just professionalism, the same as always." But something in the space between them had changed. They knew it. She knew it, and it did not need to be said. Across the room, Richard took a seat beside his mother, but his attention did not drift far. He watched Emily move between tables, efficient, composed, focused. Not once did she look back at him. Not once did she adjust her behavior to the weight of his presence. She simply worked. Margaret noticed too. A small smile touched her lips. "She does not see you the way others do," she said quietly. Richard leaned back slightly, his gaze still following Emily. "No," he replied after a moment. "She does not." There was no frustration in his voice, only something quieter, something closer to clarity. The manager approached their table again, more cautious this time. "Mr. Hayes, your private room is ready whenever you would like to move." Richard did not answer immediately. His eyes remained on Emily as she carried a tray across the room, steady, precise, unhurried. "No," he said finally. "We will stay here." The manager hesitated, surprised, but nodded quickly. "Of course." Margaret adjusted the napkin in her lap, her fingers gentle, deliberate. "You are thinking," she said softly. Richard allowed a faint smile. "I am noticing." He paused, then added, almost to himself, "There is a difference." Margaret followed his gaze once more. Emily had just stopped to refill a glass of water, her movements quiet, her expression calm. Nothing about her asked for attention. Nothing about her demanded recognition. And yet, she held the room more completely than anyone else. "You cannot buy that," Margaret said. Richard exhaled slowly. "No," he agreed. "You cannot." And for the first time that evening, the question was no longer about what Emily had done, but about what it revealed in everyone else. The rhythm of the restaurant returned, but it was not the same rhythm as before. It was quieter, slower, more aware. Emily moved from table to table with the same steady pace, her steps measured, her voice calm, her attention complete. She did not rush, even when she could feel the weight of eyes following her. Not curious anymore. Observing, learning. At table 15, a man who had been laughing earlier now sat straighter, his hands folded, his tone careful. "Take your time," he said before she even spoke. Emily gave a small nod, placing the plates with precise ease. No acknowledgement of the change, no reaction, just consistency. That, more than anything, made people uncomfortable. Across the room, Richard leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting lightly on the table, his gaze never fully leaving her path. "She did not change," he said quietly. Margaret followed his eyes again. "No," she replied. "Everyone else did." The difference settled between them. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Richard glanced around the room once more, taking in the subtle shifts. Conversations were softer, movements more deliberate. Even the staff carried themselves differently, as if something invisible had reset the standard. He looked back at his mother. "You knew," he said. Margaret smiled faintly. "I hope." Richard's brow furrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in thought. "You did not tell me you were coming here tonight." Margaret adjusted her sleeve gently. "I did not know I was," she answered. "Sometimes you find places you are meant to be." Richard exhaled slowly, his eyes returning to Emily just as she paused near the service station, checking an order slip, her expression focused but calm. "And sometimes," he said, "you find people." Margaret's smile deepened just slightly. At that moment, Emily picked up another tray, turning toward their table without hesitation. No pause, no adjustment, just the next step in her work. She approached with the same composed presence, placing a glass of water in front of Margaret first, then adjusting it slightly so it sat perfectly aligned. "Is there anything else you need?" she asked. Her tone was unchanged. No recognition of the shift in status. No attempt to impress. Richard watched her closely. "Yes," he said after a brief moment. Emily met his gaze, waiting, not expectant, just present. Richard rested his hands lightly on the table. "Sit for a moment," he said. It was not a command. It sounded almost like a request. The manager, standing nearby, stiffened slightly, his eyes widening at the suggestion. But Emily did not react immediately. She glanced at the surrounding tables, then back at Richard, measuring, not the power, the moment. Margaret touched her arm gently. "Please," she added, her voice warm. Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second, then slowly set the tray down. She did not sit right away. She adjusted her apron slightly, a small, grounding gesture, then took the empty chair across from them. The room noticed. Of course it did. A waitress sitting with a billionaire. It should have fell out of place. It did not, because nothing about this moment was about status anymore. It was about something else entirely. Richard leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet enough that only their table could hear. "Tell me," he said, "when you walked over to help her, what did you see?" Emily did not answer right away. She looked at Margaret, then back at him. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, steady, unchanged. Someone who should not have been on the floor. The answer hung there. Simple, complete, and impossible to ignore. Richard did not respond immediately. He simply held her words there, letting them settle without interruption, without turning them into something bigger than they already were. Someone who should not have been on the floor. It sounded simple. It was not. Margaret watched him closely, her expression soft, almost knowing. She had seen that look before. The moment when something inside him shifted, not from pressure, not from logic, but from something quieter, something he could not argue with. Around them, the room remained still, though no one pretended not to listen anymore. This was no longer background noise. This was the center of it. Richard leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving Emily. "And that was enough," he said, more to himself than to her. Emily did not nod. She did not confirm. She simply met his eyes with the same calm presence. Because for her, it was not a philosophy. It was not a lesson. It was just what you did. Margaret folded her hands gently in her lap. "Most people need a reason," she said softly. Emily glanced at her, then back at Richard. "They already have one," she replied. Richard's brow lowered slightly. "Do they?" Emily's answer came without hesitation. "Yes." A pause. Then, quieter. "They just decided is not enough." The words did not accuse. They revealed. That made them heavier. Richard looked down for a brief moment, his fingers resting against the table, unmoving. For a man who made decisions worth millions in seconds, this silence was different. Slower, more deliberate. When he looked up again, something had changed. Not in posture, not in authority, in perspective. "You are not wrong," he said quietly. Emily did not react. Not to the agreement, not to the weight behind it. She simply sat there, as she had stood earlier, grounded in something that did not shift with the room. Margaret reached over and lightly touched Richard's hand. "You built your world on seeing what others missed," she said. "But sometimes it is not about seeing more." Richard turned his head slightly toward her. "Then what is it?" Margaret's eyes returned to Emily. "It is about not looking away." The sentence landed softly, but stayed. Richard followed her gaze again, studying Emily as if, for the first time, not as a server, not as a moment, but as a standard he had not measured before. "You said you have tables," he said after a moment. Emily nodded once. "Yes." "Then you should go back to them," he said. The manager shifted again, uncertain, waiting for something else. But Richard's tone did not carry dismissal. It carried recognition. Emily stood slowly, smoothing her apron once more, a quiet habit, not nerves. She looked at Margaret. "If you need anything, I will be right there." Margaret smiled. "I know." Emily turned, picking up her tray, stepping back into the flow of the room without hesitation. No dramatic exit. No lingering glance. Just movement. Consistent. Unchanged. Richard watched her go, his eyes following not just her steps, but what they represented. Around him, the restaurant began to breathe again, conversations returning in softer tones, movements slower, more aware. But something had already settled too deeply to disappear. Margaret leaned back slightly in her chair, her voice gentle. "You cannot reward that the way you reward everything else." Richard did not look at her right away. His gaze remained on Emily, now at another table, speaking quietly, listening fully. "No," he said after a moment, "but I can respond to it." Margaret smiled, faint but certain. "Then make sure you do it right." And for the first time that night, Richard Hayes was not thinking like a man with power. He was thinking like someone who had just been shown what it meant to deserve it. The night continued, but it no longer felt like a performance. It felt observed, not by cameras, by conscience. Emily moved through the restaurant with the same quiet precision, placing plates, refilling glasses, listening more than she spoke. Nothing about her changed, and that was exactly what made everything else feel different. At table 9, a woman who had earlier laughed softly now held the door open for a passing server. At table 3, a man stood to help his companion adjust her chair before sitting down again. Small things, almost invisible, but not anymore. Richard noticed all of it. He sat still, his fingers loosely interlaced, his eyes no longer searching for something extraordinary, because he had already seen it. Margaret watched him instead. "You are thinking less now," she said gently. Richard gave a faint, almost surprised smile. "I am noticing more." Margaret nodded, satisfied. Across the room, Emily finished clearing a table, stacking plates with careful balance before turning toward the service station. She did not rush. She never rushed. Even now, with the room quietly watching her, she moved as if no one was. That, more than anything, held the room in place. Richard stood then, not abruptly, not to command attention, just a simple movement that somehow shifted the focus again. The manager straightened immediately, stepping forward, ready to anticipate, to respond, to correct. But Richard did not look at him. He walked past him, past the polished floors, past the tables that once demanded his attention, until he reached the service station. Emily was there, checking an order slip, her brow slightly focused, her posture relaxed. She sensed him before she saw him, not because of his presence, because the room had gone still again. She looked up, calm, as always. "Is everything all right?" she asked. No assumption, no recognition of hierarchy. Just the same question she would ask anyone. Richard nodded once. "Yes." A pause. Then, quieter. "I wanted to thank you." Emily held his gaze for a moment. Then she gave a small nod. "You are welcome." Simple, complete, as if that was enough. Richard exhaled slightly, as if something in him expected more and found clarity in the absence of it. "Not just for helping her stand," he added. Emily tilted her head slightly, waiting. "For not looking away," he finished. The words settled between them, not heavy, not light, just true. Emily glanced briefly toward Margaret, who sat calmly at the table, then back at him. "That should not be something rare," she said softly. Richard's expression shifted again. Not disagreement, recognition. "It is," he replied. Emily did not answer, because she did not need to. The silence carried more than words could. Behind them, the restaurant held its breath once more, not out of shock this time, but out of understanding. Something had been revealed, not about wealth, not about power, about choice. Richard straightened slightly, his voice calm, certain. "I will remember this," he said. Emily gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You do not have to remember," she replied. "You just have to not forget." And for a moment, neither of them moved, because in that space, something had already changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. The night came to a quiet close, but no one announced it. No music changed, no lights dimmed, and yet, something had already ended. Or perhaps something had just begun. Emily finished her last table the same way she had handled the first. Calm, attentive, unchanged. She collected the final glass, aligned the last plate, and thanked her guests with the same quiet tone that had carried through the entire evening. No one rushed her now. No one dismissed her. They watched, not with curiosity anymore, with respect. When she stepped back toward the service station, the room did not return to what it had been before. It could not, because everyone there had seen something they could not unsee. Across the floor, Richard stood beside his mother once more, helping her rise with a care that mirrored what he had witnessed earlier. Not exaggerated, not performative, just present. Margaret looked at him, a soft smile resting on her lips. "You learned something tonight," she said gently. Richard glanced toward Emily, who was now folding a clean cloth, preparing for the next shift as if this one had been ordinary. No, he replied quietly. I was reminded. Margaret nodded, her eyes following his. That is harder. They began to walk toward the exit, slow, unhurried, the room parting not out of status this time, but out of something quieter. Awareness. Before reaching the door, Richard stopped. Just for a moment. He turned back. Not to the manager. Not to the guests. To her. Emily felt it again, that shift in the air. She looked up, meeting his gaze across the distance. No words passed between them. None were needed. Richard gave a small nod. Not approval. Not authority. Recognition. Then he turned and walked out, the doors closing softly behind him. The room exhaled. Conversations returned, but they sounded different now. Softer. More measured. As if everyone was choosing their words more carefully. The manager approached Emily slowly, his posture no longer sharp, no longer commanding. Emily, he said, his voice uncertain in a way it had never been before. She looked at him, waiting. He paused, searching for something to say that matched what had happened, something that made sense of it. But nothing came, so he simply nodded and stepped back. For once, there were no instructions, no corrections, just silence. Emily returned to her work, finishing the last small tasks of the night. Folding, cleaning, resetting, the same motion she had done 1,000 times before. But something inside the room had shifted around those motions, making them feel seen. When she finally stepped outside, the air was cool, the city quieter than the world she had just left behind. She took a small breath, steady, grounding, then began to walk. No phone call, no message, no dramatic change, just the same path home. Inside, on a table near the window, a folded note remained. No one had seen when it was placed there. No one had seen who left it. The morning staff would find it. Simple, unmarked. Inside, just one line, written in clean, careful handwriting. You did not look away, and neither will I. And somewhere in the city, a man who owned everything money could measure had finally understood the one thing it could not.